Thanks for joining us today at Unstuck Your Business podcast.
You went into business with a passion to explore your skills and talents and show the world what you can do to contribute into our society and into our economic ecosystem. But a couple of years into the business and your drive and motivation has dwindled, and now you feel stuck.
When you find yourself at this crossroad of thoughts and emotions, how do you deal with it? In this podcast, we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of entrepreneurship to help you unstuck your business. We are your hosts, Inés Nazario Vega from Business Essentials Virtual Assistant.
And Edith Duran from Reason Marketing.
Welcome back to Unstuck Your Business. You have heard the advice 1,000 times. Just start an LLC. It's the ultimate legal suit of armor, right? You file the paperwork, you pay the fee, and suddenly your personal assets, your home, your savings, your family's future are tucked away safely behind an impenetrable wall of limited liability. But what if that wall isn't as solid as you think? What happens when a judge decides that your limited liability has reached its limit?
Today, we're peeling back those layers of the LLC shield. We're moving past the filing basics and diving into the high stakes reality of personal liability. When can a member actually be held responsible for the debts and judgments of their company? From alter ego traps to the dangers of commingling funds, we're looking at the cracks in the armor that every entrepreneur needs to know how to fix before the drops. And to help us peel back the layers of this subject that I know that there are many, many, many layers of, we welcome back one of our favorite legal guests, or I guess we can call him our favorite legal guest, Justin
Yes,
Munizzi.
yes, yes, yes. Welcome
Justin,
back,
thank you.
Justin.
Thank you for coming back to Unstuck Your Business podcast. We are always happy to have you.
And I'm always happy to be with you. It's always a pleasure, ladies.
Well, for those who have not listened to Unstuck Your Business before, if you can give us a little bit about yourself and about the Munizzi Law Group.
Absolutely. So Munizzi Law Firm is a Central Florida law firm, born and raised, 2 offices, small and agile team of 7 people. We focus on business and real estate law. And so for businesses in particular, we help startups, we help existing businesses with their ongoing legal needs, sort of like a plug and play legal department. And for the exit, so mergers and acquisitions, those three categories are what we help businesses with. And the startups in particular will find this topic interesting, I think, because a lot of people, as you said, think of an LLC as this impenetrable fortress. All you got to do is go on Sunbiz and file articles, and now you're invincible, right? Unfortunately not. It's a little more complicated than that, and there's a lot of caveats. So excited to talk with you guys about this today.
Yes, I think it's a very relevant topic. You know, people want to go into business. Almost every day there's an LLC being set up. I don't know how many a day, but I'm sure
Yeah.
that all these startups that come about, they want to start as an LLC. And I think we have been told and we have been advised that the LLC is the way to go to get a business started, especially solopreneurs. But I'm sure there's more to it than meets the eyes because, we know what we know.
Yes.
And we don't go beyond that. So I'm really excited about talking. Not necessarily excited because there's a lot of things in legal that we don't get excited about, but we must be educated on.
Hmm.
But most entrepreneurs, they think that LLC is a get out of jail free card on their personal assets and in the legal world. So could you explain what that actually is and why it isn't impenetrable as people may think?
Sure. So with everything in the law, there's always exceptions, right? And just to give the broad strokes, 10,000 mile high view for a second, an LLC is a legal entity. It's a vehicle for you to do something with. And there's several different options. You could pick a corporation, general partnership, limited partnership, or an LLC. You can also just be a sole proprietor, which is basically just you operating by yourself with no legal protection in terms of a separate entity. So specifically with an LLC, what are we talking about here? Well, as the name reflects, it is a limited liability company. The whole goal is to separate what's inside the business from what's outside the business.
Mm-hmm.
And so I use the example of an insulator, right? It's like a box you can put things in, and you get protection of what's inside the box from what's outside, and vice versa. Everything outside the box gets protected from what's inside.
Mm-hmm.
So an LLC is also kind of its own legal person. It can own property, it can sign contracts, and it can get sued. And so you individually are not the LLC. You are the owner of the LLC. So there's a distinction there, and it matters. Now, Florida is pretty pro-business on this. Florida actually gives LLC owners more protection than a lot of other states, but more protection is not the same as complete protection. And so there's three big ways you can still get personally sued, and we can go through those today. I think the first one we could talk about personal guarantees. The second would be breach of duties as a manager or member. So if you go beyond what you're allowed to do as a manager or member of your LLC, you have some exposure. And then the third broad area would be piercing of the corporate veil. And this is
Mm-hmm.
where the conduct, right, the things that the owners do or don't do, will now expose them to personal liability and let the courts say, we're going to disregard, or more specifically, we're going to let somebody else disregard the LLC and sue you personally because of the way that you acted. So those are the three broad areas, and we'll dive into those here in a second. So do you guys have a question? I want to hit pause for questions. Do you have any questions before I keep going?
No, no, I guess you're hitting the nail
Right.
with what explaining what the LLC is as a legal entity and what can and cannot be done from a ownership standpoint. I guess, I think one of the questions that I do have, it has to be with when we use our business funds, our, let's say, our credit card, business credit card, and use it for personal expenses. I think that's what you refer to as the pierce the
Yes.
veil kind of thing. And at what point does mixing funds become a legal catastrophe for pulling it that way?
Yeah, so the way to look at this is piercing the corporate veil is the broad umbrella term. And
Mm-hmm.
that means that again, like I said earlier, that the person who wants to sue you individually, they have to get through the LLC first. So if they can prove a set of facts, the court will say, okay, we're going to let you disregard the shield of the LLC and go after the individuals personally. So piercing the corporate veil is that umbrella term of being able to do that. Now, in order for the court to decide whether they're going to allow them to do that, they apply this kind of three-part test. One of the things would be commingling. So as you mentioned, if somebody
Okay.
is commingling their personal and LLC money, and I can give some examples of that, but mixing personal LLC money, paying all their personal bills out of the LLC account, really sort of disregarding the fact that you are supposed to have a separate, wall of separation between the business's money and your money. That would
Mm-hmm.
be one of the tent pegs, if you will, to establish veil piercing. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then
It,
the other couple things would be fraud or wrongful conduct. And then the other one would be failure to observe corporate formalities. And so we can
Mm.
talk about each one of those in turn. But yeah, to your point, commingling would definitely be a big one. And that's one that people often will overlook, right? So paying all your personal bills through the LLC's bank account or not even having a separate bank account at all. And now this is extremely common. I see this a lot with single member LLCs. They'll file
mm-hmm.
the articles of organization for the LLC, and that's it. They don't go get a
Mm-hmm.
separate tax ID. They don't get a separate bank account. They just assume that now the LLC is doing something for them, but they actually have to form a tax ID and a bank account for that LLC in order for it to do what it's supposed to do.
So I'm assuming that when, let's say, somebody gets sued, what the judge is looking for as specific red flags would be the three items that you just mentioned,
Yes.
the commingling, the
Yes.
funds, and the fraud. What was the third one?
Yep. So number one, fraud or wrongful conduct. Now, this is somewhat self-explanatory, but I'll explain it. So if you are out to defraud somebody, you're going to take money and not perform services as a basic example. You're going to commit, criminal activity, right? You're not going to be able to hide behind a LLC and say, "Oh, sorry, you signed a contract with the LLC. You got to go sue them instead of me." Not going to work. Number one, fraud or wrongful conduct. Number two, failure to observe corporate formalities. And I'll go through what that looks like in a second. The third was that commingling of assets. So
Hmm.
basically treating the business's money and your money as one and the same.
Hmm.
Okay.
Justin, just a quick question on that. When this last part that you talked about, when you're treating the business money and your money the same, um, like, do you have like easy guidelines so that you know that okay, you're crossing the line. This is going to look like this is personal because there's so many things that feel like, okay, is this like a gray area? Like, using your business debit card for gas or,
Mhm. For
to pay
dinners
a
with a
cell
client.
phone that, you may use for business and personal. Like, are there guidelines that you might want to ask yourself this question to know
Yes.
whether this is a business, or personal?
That's a good question. And one caveat to this is everybody listening needs to check with their own CPA on their specific accounting, how they're
Mhm.
filing their taxes, what they're doing with write-offs, because there is a lot of gray area here. And so there's not a bright line rule such as, hey, if you spend more than $1,000 on a business card for personal expense, somehow now you've just lost your LLC protection. There's no such rule that makes it super clear on that. But in general, what I tell clients is the LLC needs to have its own bank account. It needs to have its own credit card, and it needs to have its own identity. And so if the IRS and a plaintiff's attorney can't tell where you end and the LLC begins, that's a problem.
Mm,
On the other hand, there's a lot of things that you can, as a business owner, write off. So you mentioned gas, right? There's a
Mhm.
perfectly legitimate way to write off auto expenses. So if you're keeping track of that, if you're using that for business purposes, you're probably fine.
mhm,
Again, if it's really kind of it's a broad, thing to think about here. There's not a bright line where, hey, if you just do this one thing, now you're in trouble. So
mhm,
Mhm.
hopefully that makes sense. But again, check with your CPA and make sure that the write-offs you're doing are legitimate, and also make sure you have a paper trail for all of those things.
mm,
Yes. That was an interesting question that Edith made because I cannot tell you how many times I'm probably at a lunch gathering, and then the lunch gathering turns into a business meeting, and the person paying the lunch says, "Hey, I picked up the tab because I can, deduct it
write
on
it off.
on my business, but they're using their personal credit card for it."
Mm,
Yeah, and
Um,
that's a good point because that also brings up loans to members. And so an LLC can loan money to its member, and a member can loan money to its LLC. It can go both ways. The caveat,
okay.
the caveat is that you got to have an actual loan agreement. You got to have paperwork that backs that up, and
Mhm.
there has to be interest actually charged. There's a applicable federal rate of interest
Mhm.
for depending on the term of the loan, whether it's short range, mid range, or long range. And so the IRS gives some guidance on what that needs to look like. But the moral of the story is you can do these things, but you need to paper over it properly.
Okay. That's good to know. That's good to know. You did say the word formalities. These are things that can also put you in a situation and where you're putting at risk your assets versus an LLC. How can you explain what formalities is? Because I think that very many, especially small business owners or solopreneurs, they don't take this in consideration as far what are the formalities of a business.
Yes, great question. And so I want to just highlight real quickly that LLCs do differ from corporations a little bit on the formalities piece. Another caveat to that caveat, I just want to clarify something. When I say corporation, I'm talking about a state level, state law corporation. This
mm,
gets confusing because you can have an LLC that is taxed as a corporation, typically an S corp. But when I say corporation, I'm not referring to the S corp subchapter S tax election. I'm referring to corporation, which means, Inc. at the end of your name. So with
mm,
that in mind, corporations do have a little bit more of legwork they got to do in terms of their meeting minutes of their shareholders and directors, whereas LLCs generally don't have to do that. What you do need as a LLC is an operating agreement. And so this is a huge one where we have a lot of clients that come in who have already formed their LLC but then somebody tips them off that they don't have their paperwork in order. Oftentimes that comes from estate planning attorneys. And we love that. We love working with planning attorneys because they'll identify those things and at least throw up a red flag and let the person know that they need to talk to us.
Mm.
So the operating agreement is really the backbone of the LLC. Articles of organization is what you file with the state to create the LLC. The operating agreement is the private document that covers all the bases of who, what, when, where, why. So who are the members? Who are the managers? What do they have? What are their obligations? What are their rights? How do they admit new members? How do they exit? Some people think, hey, if I'm a single member LLC, why do I need an operating agreement? Well, the very reason that we're talking about here, when you go in that situation where somebody's trying to pierce the veil, one of the things that they would look at is, are there formalities being observed? So separate bank account, like we talked earlier, do they have an operating agreement and are they actually following it? So even if you're a single member LLC, I generally advise let's still do a basic operating agreement to cover your bases because you don't want to give a plaintiff any extra ammunition. Why would you do that?
Hi, I'm Edith, owner of Riza Marketing, a boutique marketing agency in Orlando, Florida, where we have a small but mighty team dedicated to helping service businesses dominate in the Central Florida market. We begin by helping you discover your own secret sauce. You know, that one special something only you offer and your ideal clients love you for it. When you take pride in the service you offer and the experience you provide, but feel your marketing message isn't resonating with the right audience, we can help. When you're at a loss for creating advertising that evokes emotion and prompts action, we can help. Or if releasing viewer-worthy content with consistency is an ongoing challenge, we can help. Riza Marketing helps you define your unique flair and deliver creative content on a dependable schedule. Online marketing is easy when you have a team of pros by your side. If you're ready to make marketing fun again, then visit our website, rizamarketing.com. That's RIZA marketing.com, and schedule your free discovery call today. I feel like it brings up so many other questions to me because in this explanation of formalities, we think of meeting minutes and the documentation, but really, like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. How in the scheme of building your business and being serious, a serious entrepreneur, like how critical is it to have this type of document in place? Of course, if you're getting sued, then that's when you start scrambling. But as far as operating a business and thinking about growth, how critical is this to, when you're expanding?
Yeah, it's a good question and it's a tough one to answer because it's kind of like asking, how important is it to have property insurance? Hey,
Right.
I've lived in my house for 10 years
Yes.
and I've never had any damage. So why do I need property insurance? It's kind of the same analysis where none of us know the future. None of us have a crystal ball that we can look into and say, aha, we're going to be sued in exactly 13 months. It
Right.
doesn't work that way. So unfortunately, I can't give a great answer on, hey, you can get away with putting these things off until this point. I just recommend, hey, if you're going to lay a foundation, make sure it's a solid foundation for your business so that you don't have to look over your shoulder. Because most of the time, if you are being sued or you've received a demand letter, it's typically too late to start putting those things into place because they're going to look through that paper trail and they're going to see, okay, you actually created this thing after we already filed suit. So you have to think defensively in these things and not just, hey, how much can I get away with? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think that was a
Yes.
perfect answer, honestly,
Yeah.
for that question, because if you think about this, like insurance, you just, you don't want to get caught in Florida with no hurricane insurance,
Yes.
So very similar. And I think also as a serious entrepreneur, you should know these all of these steps to protect yourself because I think with the more protection that you have on the foundation of your business, maybe the riskier decisions you can make,
Yes.
and to grow more rapidly.
Yes.
I think having an operating agreement is something that is not talked much about
Hmm.
on, workshops for new businesses or, you know, all these small talks about how to set up your business. I don't recall ever being in a workshop that will talk about operating agreements when you start up
Hmm.
your business.
Yeah, that's true, and it's not very much talked about. I often have this scenario happen where I have somebody who comes in and I ask them, "Hey, have you already done your operating agreement?" And they say, "Oh yeah, I filed that with the state already." And I immediately know they have no idea what I'm talking about because the operating
Yeah,
agreement doesn't get filed with the state, and they're
Hmm.
confusing
yeah,
that with the articles of organization, which is it's a one-page thing that you just fill out on Sunbiz and it takes 5 minutes, and that's not what we're talking about.
yes. And I think I fell into that because, yeah, I always thought, oh, articles of organization, that's what this is. And no, it's a completely different document that, you know, really is part of your insurance
It
policy.
is. It really is. And I will stress this also. I talked about if you're a single member LLC, why you should still have one. If you're a multi-member, meaning you have more than one member, you absolutely have to have an operating agreement. Like that's a 10 out of 10 necessity. You got to have it. Because
Mhm.
if you have a partnership, and even if it's with a spouse or significant other, all the more reason to establish that. If you have partners that are not a significant other or family member, you really definitely need to have it because if you have some sort of dispute, or if one of you wants to get out of the business, or God forbid, one of you passes away, is disabled, gets divorced, goes bankrupt, all these scenarios will affect their ownership in your business. And so you need
Hmm.
to deal with those things beforehand so that you don't have to let the courts decide it for you later.
Yes, yes, yes. That's very good. Justin, I'm going to switch a little bit the topic. With so many individuals when they start the LLC, they start with very little funds, or sometimes their bank account shows zero,
Hmm.
but they somehow qualify for $100,000 capital loan. And can they be held liable for undercapitalizing the business?
Yeah, that's a good question. And really, you want to think about the bigger scope of what are courts looking at when they look at piercing the veil. Undercapitalization is one of those factors that they would look at. And this is where a LLC goes around with no money and they're just using it as something on paper to try to avoid liability. And it's just a
Mm-hmm.
shell. It's not actually an operating
Mm-hmm.
business. Taking on debt and having payables out of the business would actually be sort of evidence of good faith that the company is operating, that it is actually a business, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a good question, but if you're genuinely trying to operate a company and you need to take on a loan in order to capitalize the business, you're not automatically going to have a veil piercing issue. If this is really intended more for the companies, again, that are used just as a shield to try to get away with something, and they're never going to put any money in the business. They're just using it as something on paper to try to avoid liability. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
But that being said, is there like a certain amount, a safe amount of capital business should maintain?
It really depends on the type of business, right? And so to give you two contrasting examples, private holding company that just holds a piece of rental property, a duplex, let's say, that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a very basic business. It owns one thing, it owns the real estate. It has expenses being paid out for maintenance, tax, insurance, all that, and it has one type of income coming in, which is rental income, and it might take on a loan as well for improvements, let's say. So the amount of reserves or capital it's going to need is very, very different than a construction company that's going to go out and build skyscrapers, right? So it really depends on the type of business. And so again, it's not necessarily we always want to have a bright line rule where we can have it. Unfortunately, in this one, we don't have it. So it's not the case we can say, hey, as long as you have 10,000 in your bank account, you're good. It
Mm.
doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay. All right. This has been very insightful to tell you the truth. I didn't really realize all the underlying things that we should be aware of when having an LLC. Um, Let me ask this question. Can a business owner do everything right technically, but still lose their protection because of the nature of the lawsuit?
Good question. Yeah, there has to be grounds to pierce the veil. All right. And so I mentioned personal guarantees. We didn't talk much about that, but many times I see situations where somebody forgets that they signed a personal guarantee. So this might come up on, for instance, with construction companies, they'll sign credit agreements with a supplier, and
Mm.
buried at the bottom of the fine print is a sentence that just says that the signatory personally guarantees the debt.
Mm.
Oh,
So that
wow.
would be an example where you have voluntarily said, hey, go ahead and sue me if you need to. So obviously right there, you could do everything else right. You could have your operating agreement, bank account, all that stuff. You're not doing anything criminal or fraudulent. And yet you signed a personal guarantee that you forgot about, 2 years ago. And now you're personally named on the lawsuit. So that
Mm.
would be the biggest thing. The other would simply be where you're exceeding the scope of what the LLC is doing. And so if I have a construction company, I'll stick with that example. All right, I have a construction company. It's an LLC, but then I go out and I'm driving my car, my personal car, on my own personal time, and I hit somebody. Um, I would probably be sued personally, even if I try to make the argument that I was on company time. What's most likely to happen is that both entities, me and the company, would be sued. So that would be the other thing where you're actually going beyond the scope of what the LLC does, and you're now in your
Mm.
personal lane. Okay. So that's where you'd probably be named in a lawsuit individually.
Yeah.
Justin,
You know,
I have another question on just on LLCs in general. It just um, from what you've been describing throughout this discussion, would you suggest that if you're a growing business, would you recommend transitioning to like an S corp or bigger? Like, does that offer more protection?
Okay, another great question, man. You have a lot of them today. That's fantastic. I'm glad you bring that up because I do get this question many times. So there are massive companies that are LLCs.
Mhm.
The
mm.
biggest companies you can think of sometimes, auto manufacturers, are LLCs. So an
Wow.
LLC is, yeah, so an LLC is not simply just a mom and pop type of
Mm.
operation. So that's why it's so versatile, right? Because you can use it for ultra small, like I said, like a holding company for a rental property, all the way up to, $100 million a year manufacturing company can be an LLC. So there's not really a point in growth where you say, oh wait, now we need to transition to a corporation. In fact, I often see the opposite where I'll have a company that comes to me and they're a corporation and I say, hey, have you considered converting to an LLC? Because you can preserve your S corp status for tax, which is usually the most efficient way for taxes. You
Uh-huh.
can preserve that, but then convert to a state law LLC and get things a little simplified in terms of the paperwork. And when you're a multi-member LLC, you enjoy the charging order protection, which I think we talked about on a prior episode.
Mhm.
We probably don't have time to get into that right now, but suffice it to say that LLCs, multi-member LLCs, actually do have some additional asset protection that single-member LLCs and corporations do not have.
Mm.
So to answer your question, no, there's not usually a good reason to switch from an LLC to a corporation for entity purposes. Making
Mm.
an S corp election is a tax decision, and that is a good idea for most LLCs.
Okay.
Oh,
So
okay.
what we're saying is that the transitioning is more for tax benefits than for legal benefits. Is that?
Exactly. Yeah, the S corp election is something you file with your CPA, and it goes to the
Mhm.
IRS and says, "Hey, look, this LLC has elected to be taxed as an S corp, even though it is still an LLC." So that's a separate
Interesting. I
separate.
don't think I've ever heard that before. And
Yeah,
that's an interesting point. I'm glad that we had this conversation for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah, I always had a question on that because I would hear just, opinions on one or the other, but I don't think I ever had a straight answer like the one that you just gave us. So I really
Yes,
appreciate that.
My
yes,
pleasure. That's
yes,
what I'm here for.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Justin, for the sake of time, because we like to keep our podcast to 30 minutes, what would you say are the three main takeaways from our conversation today?
So first thing is read everything before you sign it. If you don't know what you're reading, get somebody who does. So number one, make sure you read what you sign because, like I said earlier, you might have something in there that you're not aware of, like a personal guarantee that you could do. You could cross all your T's and dot all your I's with your paperwork, but if you voluntarily guarantee a debt, you're basically giving the person permission to sidestep the LLC and come after you personally. Number two is watch your conduct because, again, you can have great paperwork, but if your conduct drifts into the lane of being fraudulent or criminal or exceeds the scope of the LLC's business, now, again, you're exposing yourself to personal liability. And then third, if you're doing the other two things, but you don't have your paperwork in place, get on top of that. It's a simple thing. A firm like ours can handle that very quickly and pretty inexpensively compared to what it would cost to get sued. So get your paperwork in order if you don't. And if you have questions, if you just don't know what to do next, give us a call and we can walk you through it.
And that being said, how can our audience connect with you?
The best way to get a hold of us is just to go to our website, which is munizzilaw.com, MUNIZZILAW.com. From there, you can look at some of our blog topics. You can click and call us or shoot us an email, and we can get in touch and set up a consultation.
And for our audience, I just want to add that the topic today really came from Justin's email. We get his email, which is super informative every time we receive it. And this topic grabbed our attention and we thought, let's get Justin to come in here and talk about this with us a little more. So if you haven't signed up to get Justin's emails, I highly recommend that.
Absolutely. That's a free newsletter too. So if you want that, like I said, just reach out to us and we'll put you on the newsletter.
Yes, I appreciate it. That's exactly, I go to your newsletters to find a little bit extra information on business, and this topic came about from that newsletter. So thank you so much for sharing that information with our business community. And thank you so much for being always available and willing to share your wealth of knowledge with the business community of Unstuck Your Business.
Happy to do it, and it's always a pleasure being with you, ladies. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode, and for that, we want to thank you. Let us know what you think about today's topic by leaving us a comment and a review of our podcast.
And if you found some value on the information shared in this podcast, please subscribe and share. And you can find us on our Facebook page, Unstuck Your Business, and join the conversation and engage with other entrepreneurs as together we help each other unstuck our business. Until next time.